But thank you and welcome to everyone. I know there are still some people that are signing in, but I think we'll just take them as they come along. But welcome to this side event of the UNGGIM 11th session. This is on effective geospatial information management and services through public-private partnerships. So today we have participants and presenters from around the world. So I'm not saying good day or good morning. I'm just saying hello, everyone, and welcome. Just a few admin matters. This session is being recorded, so everyone must be aware that it is being recorded. This is for just record purposes for the UNGGIM Secretariat, and if anyone else wants to then have a look at it later on, there's a record of this session. And also, if I can please ask everyone to please ensure that your microphone is on mute, and also if you can please keep your camera switched off as well, unless you are going to be speaking, and then we can have your camera on. But please just so that we don't have interference with the microphones on and also cameras off to help preserve some data matters. The session will be organized in two parts. So first there'll be some presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer session following that. But please start recording your questions in the chat box. We will take questions out of the chat box, so you can start recording your questions at any stage through the presentations. Those presentations will then be followed by a panel session, and there will be some panelists who will be giving the opening comments, and then there will be a discussion after that. So again, please use the chat box for any discussion or questions that you would like to ask. Hopefully that covers all the admin issues, and then just to then start the session, we have first up the three speakers. The first one is Jim van Rens, who's Senior Vice President of Regal International and also a executive board member of WGIC. Following that, we'll have Professor Maria Provelli, who is a professor at the Politecnico Milano in Italy. Sorry, Jim is from the USA and Maria from Italy. And following Maria will be Sanjay, also Maria is the chairperson of the UNGGIM Academic Network. Following that is Sanjay Kumar, who is CEO of Geospatial World. I'm not too sure which country he's in at the moment. He's quite an international person. I think everyone is familiar with Sanjay. And he is also chair of the UNGGIM Private Sector Network. So those are the first three speakers. The panel discussion that we'll have later on will be moderated by Cheryl Lisha, who is from the Griffin University in Australia. She's also a member of the International Society of Digital Earth and one of the members also of the academic network. So Cheryl will moderate the panel session later on. But first up, Jim, over to you, please.
All right. Thank you, Derek. And following your lead, I would absolutely love to say hello to everyone around the world. And of course, welcome to the presentation. As Derek mentioned, I am with Regal, but also I am with the WGIC. I'm one of the executive members. And I want to thank the WGIC, of course, the UNGGIM Private Sector Network and the UNGGIM Academic Network for sponsoring and organizing this presentation. I also want to thank everyone for attending today, and also our very distinguished participants and panelists on this presentation. Without them, There's no meat on the bones, so to speak. So I'd like to thank them for all of that. So to move on to my presentation, I want to explain what WGIC is. So we are a global not-for-profit trade association of private sector companies, and we all work in the geospatial industry. And we are really afforded a wonderful opportunity to have our founder with us today on the panel, Sanjay Kumar. So big shout out to Sanjay for getting all of this organized and launched. So we have a whole series of different memberships within WGIC. The patron members that you see are really our 50,000-foot strategic guidance for the association. And then we have, of course, other memberships, corporate members, associate members, and we have an executive board, and the executive board is the group that comprises the hands on the steering wheel with the secretariat of the organization to move things forward and to keep the organization growing and successful as it's been. So we're quite fortunate with that growth and capability. One of the areas, of course, we have our WGIC partner organizations, and this is where we want to highlight particularly the United Nations and their participation, their sponsorship of WGIC. This has been an important relationship for us from the very beginning of the organization, and the statistics division lifted, supported, and provided us a really terrific, strong push to get us going. And of course, the importance of that is that all of us, private, academia, the United Nations, country managers, we're all speaking, we're all talking so that we can collaborate effectively. And I think you all know that for any kind of program to be effective, effective collaboration is a strong requirement. So WGIC has generated from its initial founding a series of reports. These reports are developed by thought leaders within the WGIC membership. We have a whole series of committees that our members are participating in, and we report on very important and timely topics that are critical to the geospatial industry. And our reporting of those topics really focuses on the geospatial aspect, not necessarily the full global aspect of AI, ML, and all the technical matters that go with that, but really the geospatial impact that is felt, and our input to world leaders, our input to the industry itself. This is what these reports are aimed at. They've been very successful. We've had great socialization of reports by partnerships and other organizations around the world that are clearly enthused that WGIC is speaking out on these issues and putting a little stick in the sand, so to speak, with regards to where we stand on those issues. These reports are really fuel for generating interest, participation, and membership within WGIC. So it's a very, very, very important aspect of our activities. And these are done by the committees of WGIC, and all of these people are committed. They spend a lot of their time developing these, and they're very professionally done. And I would suggest to all the participants today to take time to download these, review them, to see what it is in terms of an output or a product that WGIC mentions with regard to these efforts. So, elements for effective public-private partnerships. I think everyone on the screen can see these. The all of these are critical elements to be able to launch this, and a public-private partnership can take many different forms. And the importance of all of this is that it takes the complete package to be able to deliver a public-private partnership. Now, there's one element I would like to speak to that's not necessarily listed here. I was very fortunate many years ago, so it'll almost be several decades, that the USGS in the United States launched the preliminary aspect of a new national map that has been called 3DEP. So that's been the tag, either 3DEP or the US national map. And that was a very innovative public-private partnership. And there's reports that delineate all those different aspects and the different players and how that rolled out and things of that nature. But one of the most important aspects that I witnessed, this is from the early 2000s on until today, is that the team at USGS managed the communication process exceptionally. So they communicated sideways, they communicated up, they communicated down, they communicated within their organization. They had to go to the White House. They had to talk to the Technology Council at the White House. They had to go to Congress, report on that. They had to deal with state GIS managers. They had to deal with state geospatial managers. They dealt with the private side of the business. They talked to technology developers. They wanted to know what was coming, what's here now, where is it going, how is this going to work for us. They were very effective in identifying the need for a cost payback assessment of their efforts, and that's called the NIA. So that's another very important document that controlled the communication process, identified key aspects of the program so that everyone could be on the same page. And for any kind of a partnership to work, effective communication, open communication is critical. And I believe that that was one of the hallmarks of the success of that organization. And I would suggest that anyone looking at developing a partnership like this really focus in on the communication and the collaboration that flows from that communication. So, not to get on my high horse too much here, but that was one of the very strong elements that they were quite successful with. So with that, I want to thank everyone around the world for attending with us, and I will now turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation and for the last slide with all the points that are relevant with respect to the collaboration, that I agree on most of them. So hello, everyone. I understood that we can say good morning, good afternoon. Just hello, everyone. This is Maria Brovelli. I'm a professor at the Politecnico di Milano, professor of GIS at the Politecnico di Milano, and I happen to be also the chair of the UNGGIM academic network. So what I want to do is to introduce the academic network. What is the academic network and what we are doing now? So first of all, the academic network is the strategic knowledge research and training arm of UNGGIM. So this is what we want to do. And it is a coalition of universities, recognized university, research center, education centers, working specifically or with the main interest in developing research and education in geospatial and land information and the related matters. which are the main topics we are working on. So first of all, we want to promote and foster collaboration among universities and research groups. So it is something which is internal to the academia and research. We want also to encourage members to undertake work able of contributing to the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. We want to be a forum for the geospatial academics and researchers with the objective of advancing competencies and qualification for the UNGGIM. We want to be a communication platform for the country and for the member countries. So this is something external to the academia, specifically to the academia. We want to be open also to the other realities, and therefore to be a communication platform for the member countries in such a way that they can provide us with the key problems, needs, and areas of research that are of interest of them, where we can contribute most. And then we want to provide capacity building and developing material that is useful for all the UNGGIM actors. And specifically, this is was the topic of one of the main topic of the side event that we organized yesterday with respect, where we wanted to better understand what is really needed, what are the main points we can contribute, the main contributions we can give to the UNGGIM. Speaking about UNGGIM, we have more than 50 members. All the members must be accepted by the network, so there is a procedure of voting for accepting the members. And starting from the beginning of this year, we have a new executive team. You see here, I'm the chair, Sunyan Lee is the deputy chair, and Ivana Ivanova, she's the secretary. A new advisory board. You see here the people of the advisory board. Among them, there is also Cheryl, the person who will chair the next session. And we have also the regional representatives of almost all the parts of the world, but the Arabic countries. So this is for sure one problem that we wanted to solve, because we are a bit underrepresented in the Arabic countries and in Africa, more in the Arabic countries than in Africa. Okay, so starting from this year, we decided to focus on some actions. The first action was to increase the coordination of the network, to try to increase the membership in the underrepresented regions, as I said, the Arabic countries and Africa. And with respect to that, obviously, if you have contacts with the professor in relevant universities in this part of the world, they are more than welcome. And then the third point is that of establishing a pathway towards UNGGIM online. We have to decide educational inventory, catalog, repository, even if we are going toward the idea of the catalog. And if you want, we can discuss it later. Then the other point is that we worked on the terms of reference, which was old, so we decided to update it, specifically with two main points. One point was was a lesson learned during COVID, so that there is the possibility of meeting online. Meeting online has some pros and cons, but for sure makes easier the meeting among us. So now we have a monthly meeting, and we want to maintain this habit of a meeting because it's important to have this possibility of discussion among the different members of the network. And then the other relevant point, which is new from the term of reference, is that we decided to have also a new member, which is the associate member. So the ordinary member of the network are universities and research centers, but we realized that there are also other actors who are interested in be part of the network. And so we defined this new figure of the associate member, which are internationally recognized non-academic research entities who wish to participate and to contribute to the activity of the network. And the associate members can participate fully in the discussion and the activities of the network, but they don't have the right to vote, and they are not eligible for position of the executive committee and the advisory board. But on the other side, they can fully participate to all the activities of the network. And this is a door that we want to open to everyone. Then another point, as we want to be a communication platform, we decided to renovate our website. That new looks definitely better. And again, with the idea of being more collaborative with the other branches, the other bodies of UNGGIM, we made a survey and we asked all our members where they want to be included, in which other working group or network they want to be included as delegate of the academic network. And for instance, in case of the private sector, those are the people. And you see the first one, the first point of contact is exactly Cheryl, who is here with us chairing the next session. Again, this is just to push our member in be active also in the other bodies and branches of UNGGIM. Then we are discussing about this point related to inventory, catalog, repository of resources, educational resources. And the idea now is to consider a catalog as a good average solution, because as a matter of fact, we realize that there is a lot of educational material already available. So what is needed probably is to have a catalog helping people in selecting what they are interested in, which is not simply an inventory, because it means that we have to put our brain on the material that is available for deciding if it can be suggested and for what it can be suggested and so on. So that is my conclusion, and I want to thank the organizer for having the possibility of discussing a common path among all the before the academic and private sector, but among also the other networks of the UNGGIM. Thank you.
Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. I was waiting for any intervention from the moderator. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to present in this important event on public-private partnerships, which is in collaboration with WGIC, PSN, and Academic Network. I'm Sanjay Kumar. I am the chair of UNGGIM Private Sector Network, as well as the CEO and founder of Geospatial World. And as my friend Jim introduced me in the beginning, that I'm the founder of World Geospatial Industry Council as well. Derek, I'm in Delhi right now, and yeah, it's the fact that I traveled to 36 cities in 75 days in the month of June and July, so that was pretty hectic traveling around the COVID times, and that make me also connect with a lot of people socially, which kept me like energetic enough. I wanted to say that I do have a slides. Normally, I'm not known to present slides, but I will not be talking about the PSN as much. I have already given a link in the chat box about PSN. What I would like to just give a bit of background, which is very important to understand about PPPs. The fact of the matter is that I and Prashant Shukla, Derek Clark, Greg Scott, four of us who are in this meeting are one of the early ones who actually joined GGIM movement. And the reason I joined GGIM because I was organizing a meeting known as the National Mapping Agencies and Industry Exchange Forum. And probably Paul Cheng in the UNGGIM got to know that, and he invited me to talk about what happened. And then he realized the importance of private sector engagement. And then I got involved into the whole discussions right from its formative stages. In fact, I'm very grateful to the United Nations because the origins and genesis of WGIC owe its credibilities and its existence to the United Nations to a large extent, because when we set up the private sector network, there was no body like WGIC, and that's why the private sector network came up. And then we formed the WGIC, and the WGIC was officially launched and inaugurated in the UN building on 1st of August 2018. That was a phenomenal achievement for an industry trade body to be recognized and launched on day one in front of 100+ member countries. And I would really appreciate the leadership and trust and commitment of United Nations towards private sector. What I'm going to do is share some of my thoughts on what I believe. The fact that about 10 years back when we talked about engagement between the government and industry, the objective was to have a better collaboration. And now we have gone from better collaboration to the discussion on the public-private partnership models. It's unfortunate that in our industry, the public-private partnership models are not much in existence. There are some cases around the world, but they're not very well defined. They're not very well known. They're not very well practiced, which means that we need to actually work towards that direction. And how do we work towards that direction is what I'm going to share a storyline in next 5-7 minutes. My slides are more for the records. I will not explain those slides, but I'll just do a kind of narrative like this. So the whole knowledge, commercialization and industrialization, this process is almost about 20 to 25 years. Now it goes from science to technology to infrastructure to industrialization. At the same time, if you look at it, it becomes a tool, utility, and commodity. This is the kind of the process of monetization and commercialization of science to applications. It takes about 20+ years. I heard a keynote address in 2007 where Sir Stuart Martin talked about credit card size satellites. And now we have small satellites after almost 15 years. We're not yet there of credit card satellites. That's the kind of journey of commercialization of science takes place. So that's very important to have a background of that. Moving further, data-driven innovation for sustainable development. Sustainable development data is key today because we live in information age. Since we are in information age, the determinant of development is the data and information and knowledge. Do you have data? Have you converted that to information? Have you actually made it into an actionable knowledge? So development parameter is changing. The data and knowledge are becoming the parameters of sustainable development. So as we need to be very careful about what is that data ecosystem. It talks about geospatial data and thematic data and other data sources and how that data is being powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, IoT, and other stuff to actually develop solutions driven by the software and systems. Then you actually get into making use of that data across various industries, and that's how you actually have a journey of data to knowledge towards sustainability. And this talks about the geospatial industries value chain. It's a very detailed slide, but I just want to say that having integrated geospatial technology and embedded and empowered that geospatial technology with the in IT and engineering and other workflows, then you develop major solutions, and those solutions are empowering the workflows of the primary social and economic industries, right from tourism to mining to energy to transportation to cities to health, a large extent. So when you're making use of geospatial to these sectors, this is a comprehensive ecosystem. It's not just about map, it's about integration of workflows, it's about empowerment of technologies, and then making that productivity as an output, efficiency as an output. It's just not limited to decision support system, but it is a productivity tool. Moving forward, we all hear about digital twin. In fact, digital twin, which started as an engineering domain, today is a kind of IT domain, or is it a domain where you're talking about digital representation of physical world in the real time. But geospatial infrastructure is very critical for empowering digital twin, be it the positioning infrastructure, be it the data infrastructure, and be it the integration and spatial dimension of adding that spatial dimension, visualization power. How do you actually visualize that data into the real world? In the real world, in the physical world, we see from our eyes, but how do you see that statistical information in a digital environment? That is where the spatial empowerment of the comes in picture. And geospatial infrastructure plays a critical role in enabling digital twin. And if the digital twin is a tool of circular economy, then it is all the more important that we invest into digital infrastructure and we invest into the geospatial infrastructure, which can empower the circular economy through the interface of digital twins. And there's a debate going on, and few countries have taken a leap. They have taken a lead in making a decision about building a national digital twin. And that national digital twin is actually very, very important for pursuing the national development goals. And national development goals are aligned with the sustainable development goals, be it UK, Holland, some of those countries which are looking at innovation and as a tool for next generation economy and society. They are building national digital twin, and this slide explains a bit about what it all is about. Then moving further, what is the benefit? There is a benefit to the society, there is a benefit to the economy, there is a benefit to the businesses, and there is a benefit to the environment, and so as to individuals. So digital twin is not just a concept, it's a reality today. It is in place, it is in practice, but it is not in practice at the national level. It is in practice into certain industries. And that's where we have already started seeing the power of digital twins towards towards productivity and efficiency of those domains. But there is a debate going on at the National Digital Twin, and I have a reason for putting emphasis on this, because if you want to move forward as a national geospatial agency and you want to align yourself with the national development goals and you want to play a role into transforming your economy and society, you as a national geospatial agency and we as a geospatial professionals have a responsibility to actually seed this entire argument into the national and industrial strategies. They would not understand. We have to take a proactive approach to educate them about the power. Otherwise, we will lose. And we will not only lose as a profession, but we will actually lose an opportunity to serve the nation and the society better. And that's what is very important, because Three recommendations I want to put forward is that the geospatial agencies and geospatial professionals should look at strengthening geospatial infrastructure, which is data infrastructure, resilient positioning infrastructure. This is emerging as a very hot topic. Positioning infrastructure is very important. We need to do that. We need to make it more resilient because accuracy of location is becoming more and more important tool for a lot of digital cities and smart cities and kind of applications where the precision matters. Then moving forward to the knowledge platforms and services, you don't need data, you need knowledge. The people need knowledge, they need actionable information, they are not worried about data. So data to service what it is important. And of course, standards and interoperability frameworks are very, very critical so that we can make use of this whole power in a seamless manner. Second, I would say that I would encourage the governments to make geospatial regulatory framework in partnership with the commercial sector. The amount of energy we need to prepare geospatial infrastructure and knowledge platforms, it cannot be done only with the public sector. Public sector has a role to play, a role of an anchor to play. But commercial sector has a role to play to be a partner, and that's where I think the public-private partnership becomes very, very critical. Public-private partnerships wherein the government and private sector brings in the equity in the form of technology and finance and processes, and then make joint efforts for developing fundamental services which could be delivered to the citizens, businesses, governments, and through certain areas which is kind of open and free, and certain of them could be on commercial basis, so that there is a provision for commercial companies to go forward and make returns on their investments. And I think this is where the leadership role of WGIC, PSN, and various other organizations is very critical. I would suggest that, hey, let's talk more, develop some kind of models which can be used to promote and have a kind of constructive dialogue with the public sector to make a valuable role of geospatial profession in the next generation economy and society. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you for that, Sanjay. I'd like to then thank the three opening speakers for setting the scene and providing some very thoughtful insights into these collaborative partnerships. So thank you very much to the presenters, to the speakers. We will now have a session for any questions from the participants. And I see here, please, if you could post those in the chat box. See here we have Asmat Ali is just referring to a publication regarding PPPs in Pakistan. So thank you for that. We have another one from Cecile Blake with a question: does a geospatial industry really exist? How is the income generated from the multiple geospatial contributors, parts measured and included to a country's GDP? Would anyone of the speakers like to provide a response? Maria? Sanjay?
Sorry, no, I leave Sanjay answering to this one. What I wanted to add is that I liked a lot the presentation of Sanjay. I agree with you. The point relevant for the academia probably is to see if we are prepared for that. I mean, not in a single university. Like, I know that there are some universities where these topics are really taught. But the point is that considering in general university at the worldwide level or the academia, are the professor ready for the digital twin? I don't know. This is a question. And with respect to that, I want to ask Sanjay, in his opinion, what are the most important points we have to focus on? Okay, thank you.
So responding to Cecil's question, yes, geospatial industry does exist and it's real. It's very much real. It just depends on how do you see that. There is a report by Dutch government which talks about the Dutch Geospatial Economy report, which has very clearly and categorically outlined the direct contribution of geospatial industry in Dutch economy is about $5 billion US. Dutch government is a very small country, and Dutch is a small country that there's a $5 billion direct income to the Dutch economy, and there's an indirect impact on the GDP is different. I'm talking about the $5 billion is the direct income. There's a detailed report which is in public domain. So I would say that that's just one example that how do you want to see that? Geospatial industry does exist and it's real. What are the most important things to do is the fact that we as an industry have to work together, and we are working together. We are working together. But the point is that message being conveyed to the larger stakeholders? So geospatial industry is having its own very, very direct connect for the entire supply chain management. But national geospatial agencies are not even anywhere near there. And that supply chain management market itself is into around $30 to $40 billion. Advertising market, real estate market, they're all driven by the geospatial tools. I can put on record that the Google Maps annual revenue is about $8 to $10 billion from maps only. So yes, it does exist. What we need is, can we actually work with the national governments and the global institutions to make them think beyond? Instead of being just map producers, be the drivers of the policies, be the high level connect between the geospatial industry and the climate change, or the mining industry, or the energy industry. That is where we need the government to think forward. Those are the areas which are the fundamentals of economy and society. And I think there is a lot of need to do, a lot of work needed to do. And that's what I think what WGIC has been trying to do in its own small manner, to partner with World Energy Council or World Federation of Engineering Organizations or International Telecommunication Union. We are trying to showcase the larger picture and the value proposition of this technology to those organizations, and then reach to that stakeholder.
Thank you very much for that, Sanjay. I don't know if any of the other presenters want to respond on that one. There have been some other comments that are coming through, no, thank you for those. Maria, there's a comment to you to thank you for your course, which enlightened Adolf Malachi. So well done. Okay, there are some other chats that are coming through, but I don't see if there are any particular questions. I don't know if there are any further questions coming through. But here's one here from Sakshi Singh. Mapping for the masses, what scope does it have beyond present day applications as technology penetrates deeper into the society? Who's going to take that one? Maria, you want to
take that?
Or Sanjay, you're going to take it?
No, I'm happy to take that unless something,
okay.
There's another
Start with it, Sanjay.
So mapping for the masses, first of all, the mapping for the masses is taking place in a massified manner. Almost out of 7 billion or 8 billion people, probably 5 to 6 billion people are using smartphones, and they're all using maps. They're all collecting data. They're all even In fact, I come from a country which is, like India, which is a developing country with so many people. But if you go to the local remotest part of India, you will find a vegetable hawker is actually using some kind of app on a smart device to sell something using maps. Maps is basically absolutely massified today. And I can cite hundreds of examples in the remotest parts of the ecology and environment sensitive zones where the local communities are building maps, and they're building maps to understand the living, what kind of crops, what kind of water bodies they are living. If you go to Foundation for Ecological Security, they are doing such phenomenal work, and there are hundreds of such organizations who are actually working at the community level, and they are mapping through the tools. And of course, mobile is one major tool, but then they're mapping with the small tools to understand their ecosystem. So I would say that this is happening beyond our imagination. We just don't know about it.
Yeah, if I may add something, I agree with Sanjay, and I believe that maps today they are commodities. As a matter of fact,
Yes.
Is something that everyone is using, independently of the fact that is aware about mapping, cartography, and everything. So it has already penetrated everything. The point is we must add something more. It's just like, for instance, the location with the global positioning system, or GNSS. I remember in the beginning was just for scientists. Now everyone is locating himself or herself using the location technologies, as a matter of fact. But in my opinion, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning, because what Sunny presented about the digital earth, the digital twin, will become a commodities as well in probably 10 years. The point, in my opinion, the relevant point is, are we prepared to that? Because I want it to be something for everyone, not to be just something from an elite of people understanding, and the other as simply users without understanding what is behind it. So I want really that this becomes a process of democratization in using also geospatial information for pushing everyone at the higher level of knowledge, for better understanding the environment around us, and what we have to do, what are our commitment with respect to the environment where we live. Again, maps are commodities. Digital twin will become commodities in few years. The important point is will be for everyone, or will be just for a few people. That is, in my opinion, the very important point.
Right. No. Thank you for that. I'm mindful of time, and I think we need to close off this part of the session and move on to the panel discussion. So I want to once again thank the three speakers and for your valuable contributions. From some of the comments that are coming through, they certainly enjoyed your presentations, and also to thank those who are contributing to the discussions through the comments. Asmat Ali has asked a question, which I think Talia has given an answer by referring to the UK report. So I'll suggest you look at that one then, Asmat. Okay, so thank you very much to our speakers, and I'd like to hand over then to Cheryl. Over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. Thank you, Maria, for the opportunity to be part of this session in this capacity. Inside the academic network, I think you are at the very front, moving on from Abbas's work previously, taking the baton. We've just all watched the Olympics to then say, right, what is the charge for academics in connecting with industry so that we can raise awareness around what is possible with the tools and the software and do that really deep thinking and rapid action, that transition to be able to say, right, the academic network can do the deep thinking. We have the time and space and luxury of our, critical thinking learning. But then the rapid action is the industry context. Sometimes governments take a while to shift and steer course, and that is the rationale for government, and it works. Alongside this rapid opportunity for change gives us hope, I think, for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because what Sanjay is talking about is a groundswell that gives me hope personally and me hope within the academic network that we can make a difference. Yes, so thank you, Maria. So without further ado, we have a few wonderful panelists for our conversation today that will take us further into this territory of the influence of policy and public-private partnership collaboration in this really diverse geospatial ecosystem that you've been hearing about. And I would like to first bring to the microphone Dr. Zafar Mohamed Abbas, who is a long-term mentor and colleague from Australia. And Zafar, I think a bit like Sanjay, between the two of you, I think you're a bit like our satellites that orbit the planet multiple times very regularly, keeping a human scan on our progress and encouraging us to do better. You have been recognized as one of Australia and the planet's leaders in geospatial territory. And actually, you are also firmly inside industry as the executive director inside Spatial Vision for the consulting and international relations. I know you often, every day, you would be talking to academic colleagues as well as industry colleagues. I would call you a boundary operator in that context. And your commitment and passion for the UN Sustainable Development Goals is remarkable in how you thread it through your everyday work as well as your deep thinking that you do. So I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections in this panel on how you're approaching that opportunity to influence policy with these public-private partnership collaborations. Over to you.
Thank you, Terrell, for the kind introduction. One of the weakest link around the PPP, which my other learned colleagues will agree, is the policy, and the policy barrier is the maturity of the policy is not there amongst the government or the private sector who are willing to invest. I think this is where I think there is significant gap. If you look at developing countries, I think the private sector or less developed countries, the private sectors are willing to invest, bring on the technology or the infrastructure, be it is for positioning or be it is for geospatial software. But the governments need to have clear directives and policies. With my training with London School of Economics, I did a course on policy intervention and development. And as some of my colleagues from economics background, like Prashant Shukla, would concur that government only intervenes with policy, and also Sanjay has good policy background, that only government intervenes with the policy if it requires, otherwise it lets market forces determine. If you look at other sectors, it's very well established where you see the infrastructure. I think, how do we fill this gap? I think this gap should be filled in multitude of ways. And one of the things is lack of understanding around the policy from the private sector as well as from the government, more from a geospatial community. And this is where I think I would like to use this platform for the academic network to think about how can we develop PhDs and research which bring in economic as well as technology mergers with respect to policy side, because there's very less in our geospatial community looking into that particular area around applying the value chain and the economics, and mostly I think our folks are more determined around the data, the technology side, but we don't play very well in the policy side, and that is a barrier for us to communicate to the top chain, where we are unable to bring and communicate to the secretaries or the finance ministries. This is, I may be wrong, this is just my personal observation in dealing with strategies with different countries. So therefore, a key message that I see is how can we break this barrier, and there needs to be an investment from geospatial sector, especially education, literacy, and allowing the government, the geospatial folks working in the government to bring this literacy around the policy side, and that will really help to make a step change as a whole of a sector there. With these points, I'd like to pass it on back to you, Cheryl, so that I'd like to hear the others' opinions on there and take questions later. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Safar. So with that policy context in mind, then I will then now shift to one of our esteemed industry colleagues, Prashant Shakul. And Prashant, as you come to the virtual microphone, I will just give you a short introduction, if that's all right. That I think you reside in Canada, or at least you come from Canada. You may be somewhere else on the planet at the moment. And you are a highly skilled and visionary international and national geospatial executive with your corporate knowledge in the C-suite executive and that transformational context around having people and finances and projects come together. You have extensive experience for doing that in the geospatial world. And this is from the ground all the way through to our atmosphere and into the satellite orbits and operations, including the world of artificial intelligence strategy and implementation. So with that context, I know I've stalked you on LinkedIn. I can see that you've had some interesting Arctic spatial data infrastructure experiences, so different parts of the planet coming together in looking for problem solving and solutions. And you represent Canada on the GGIM as a GGIM expert. So with your multiple awards and that global context, very much looking forward to your perspectives in your capacity in WGIC as well on the partnerships and business models for the geospatial sector. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl, for that very kind and generous introduction. I hope I don't disappoint after all of that. After all of that expectation building. I just want to make one point clear, is that I am no longer the head of the Canada Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation. I am in the private sector now as the Chief Operating Officer of Core AI, an artificial intelligence company that's focused more on the mining sector. And I'm looking at things like extractives and transparency around mining and the use of satellite technologies and geospatial fusion with AI to detect minerals on the surface of the planet. So having all kinds of fun doing that. And I'm also doubling with the WGIC and staying involved in something that's been a passion for me. And I want to thank Sanjay for recognizing those of us at the early stages where we bore the slings and arrows of misspoken fortune when we were pushing the inclusion of the private sector into a lot of deliberations that were led and by and large owned or monopolized by government institutions in mapping. And I think that also is relevant to our discussion today, because the nature and role of governments has changed very dramatically, even since 2009 when I first started at the Canada Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation till today. I've seen a dramatic shift, and I'm going to try to leave you with a few items, because I think there's a real opportunity and there's a real rhythm to what we're saying here. And I think I'm going to try to adapt on the fly, and hopefully I do a good job of it. Now, the first big idea I want to leave you with is that now is the time for private-public partnerships to make a reemergence. And why is that? Well, there is global attention on geospatial businesses and business models. No one can dispute that. During COVID, Jack Dangerman talked about the trillions of maps that were created, but it's also more than maps. If you look at where the IT companies are really pushing, the Amazons of the world, the Intel corporations, the relatively new but very significant MNCs, they are embracing geospatial. They may not call it geospatial, which is why I think some of our esteemed panelists and participants have asked questions around why it is, or is there, a geospatial industry, to which Sanjay has rightly replied. There is geospatial activity across many industries. So how do you reconcile the horizontality of our industry as well as the elements associated with the verticality of our industry in terms of measuring location and identifying location as a fundamental aspect of how we govern this planet? And so when we talk about why now, we know that many industrialized nations are focusing on the role of the private sector in geospatial and Earth observation. Why? In large part because of agility. Governments have a tendency to be very slow moving, but once they have an inertia, that inertia keeps moving forward. In order to integrate a level of agility, national economies can partner with governments, and in partnering with governments, they can bring a level of innovation and productivity to national economies that will be essential to prolong growth in the future. And that is really critical in a post-COVID economy, as we are trying to rebound and re-kick in new directions, as well as achieve levels of growth that had been extant throughout the pre-COVID economy. The second thing that I would highlight is that in terms of private and public partnerships, there's a very significant second age of space that is coming about. We're talking about Mars, we're talking about the credit card size satellites for Earth observation. That's just Earth observation. We're talking about things like advanced robotics, we're talking about Mars missions, we're talking about potential observation of Mars. And so the geospatial capabilities that exist are really not that far out in the future. And in fact, they are being planned for, and sensors are being developed in order to be able to identify the surface features on the planet of Mars and potentially others. So I think there's a second dimensionality that is extraterrestrial in terms of Earth observation, if you will. The other thing that I think is really concerning from a sustainable development point of view is that many advanced geo nations have head starts. And the whole question of the digital divide, if we are to try to close the gap of inequality that exists across nations, that this body and the UN need to work together to ensure that private sector know-how is integrated into developing countries or areas that are less developed than the more advanced economies, and reduce maturation times of their national economies, particularly in the technology sector. And listen, the final thing that we have to recognize is that there are mammoth challenges around investments in things like infrastructure renewal across the world, in terms of creating digital twins, in terms of addressing climate change. And these mammoth challenges really push the question and issue of debts and deficits. And for those of us that have lived debts and deficits before and have had to make deep reductions in terms of geospatial expenditures while in government, remember, it's hard for us as mappers or Earth observation specialists to justify a dollar or a rupee spent on what commonly is called mapping in relation to something on healthcare. Healthcare, especially in a post-COVID world, is a far easier sell and will be a far easier sell in a constrained fiscal environment than will maps or 3D visualizations. I hate to be as crass as that in terms of explaining how that dimensionality or how that sense of difference will be put forward, but having been there and seen that kind of expression, I think that represents a very significant issue. So this is why now is also the time to start pushing the public-private sector partnerships so that we can also indicate to governments that we're here, that we're ready to work, that we're ready to put skin in the game, and that we're ready to sustain the level of innovation and growth that is essential in a post-COVID economy, in an economy that's recognizing the dangers inherent in climate change, and one in which can also support how it is we're securing supply chains as well as opportunities to provide better coverage in terms of any kind of pandemic response for populations. Now, I just went through that. The second big idea, so now is the time is the first big idea. The second big idea I want to leave with all of you is that not all private-public collaborations or procurement arrangements are PPPs. This is something where our language has to mature. So there are private-public collaborations, absolutely, and there are some that are absolutely fantastic, but there are also some that have been around for 15, 20, 30, 40 years, where the levels of collaboration have left to monopolistic or oligopolistic situations where there are absolute giants that have a particular business model that are constraining levels of innovation in the geospatial industry, and to some extent are limiting its growth. That being said, public-private partnerships are very specific collaborative arrangements. So not all private-public collaboration are PPPs, but remember, all PPPs are private-public collaboration. Okay? Now, why and how can you differentiate what is a PPP? Well, essentially, our study has indicated there are about 10 different business models with very definite structures built around them. And this was done, this table has been developed as we surveyed some of the more advanced countries that have embraced PPPs and by advanced, I mean countries that may not be considered advanced in terms of the UN, but more that have a desire to embrace public-private partnerships, who have very strict definitions around these 10 business models of design and build, operation and upkeep contracting, design, build, maintain. Now, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details given our time constraints, but our report lays these out and gives you a sense of them. What we also do is take the excellent work that was done by the National Geospatial Advisory Committee in the United States, as well as the United Nations, to highlight where we felt some of the more the more specifically related sets of partnerships that we've talked about have fallen on the PPP continuum. So when we talk about I think 3DEP was mentioned here, 3DEP was seen more as a middle level PPP. It focused more on the contracting side of things with very innovative procurement arrangements, but not necessarily falling into the definition, the 10 business model definition that exists around most PPPs and is written into legislative frameworks in certain and specific countries. And then what we did there is that we drafted a set of guidelines around how it is you want to build an effective PPP. So again, so that's been the second big issue or the second big takeaway that I'd like to leave with you guys. The third big takeaway is that every PPP is unique, and that advancing the specific business model as defined by the legal framework you put in place with the PPP means that every private sector entity is going to require leadership, some level of risk taking, and will require sustained pressure to not only convince governments, but to build faith and trust in the concept of a PPP, because they actually are not new. They have been around since the 1980s. And in the 1980s, when they were a relatively new model that grew out of the whole new public management movement, there was a level of experimentation that had to occur. There had to be a level of failure that had to occur. But now, 30 years on, many of those PPPs have been improved upon. And one of the areas that I thought was really fascinating in its embrace of PPPs has been India, where the PPP in the areas of construction and infrastructure has led to rapid changes in the transportation corridors and infrastructures of that country, where the private sector internationally has delivered major projects, and many of them on time. And our Indian colleagues would say some have been replete with issues around transparency and issues around whether or not the right value for money was achieved. But again, those are the issues that exist with any kind of arrangement. But as you move through them over time, as you understand them, as you practice with them, as you continue to create trust through a global entity like this and work together internally as an association of industry players, we can really enhance that capability. So basically, to sum up, my big 3 points for you all is that now's the time for PPP. It's going to require a lot of work. Not all private-public collaborations are PPP, and that there are very specific business models, and that leadership and sustained pressure has to come from somewhere. And I think we're talking to the people that actually have to take up the mantle today, here and now. I think you're muted.
You're muted.
I'll say that bit again. Thank you, Prashant. I was just saying, you've been very diligent in the chat stream in providing answers to our delegates' questions, and you have a few more there to be able to answer. They've really enjoyed your talk, so thank you for walking through that. And I think the description of the variations of PPPs is super helpful as we then can pull apart the opportunities that exist within them. Thank you very much. Which brings us to our next speaker for our panel session today, Willie Govender. Now, Willie, as you come to the virtual microphone, you're emanating from Durban in South Africa, and you're an executive board member on WGIC, which is fantastic. I think we won't say about anybody's age, but you've got more than 3 decades of experience in many startup environments, technology, property, consulting services. You've seen it all, and indeed internationally as well, through South Africa, India, US, China. Interestingly, you did start out in the mapping industry, and then the innovation has taken you on a number of twists and turns in software development and property. So with your global context and your perspectives on the PPP interactions in enabling and catalyzing startups. Keen to hear your perspectives within this panel. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. Yeah, so my role today is largely to present some of the work that we've done. I think at the beginning of this discussion, Asha posted the link to the report that the WGIC has prepared. And in my role as the chairperson, I'll just give you an idea of what we covered, what the purpose is around it, and some of the work that we're doing in the future around that. So if you can have the next slide, please. So I think, let's go to the next one. I think we're mindful of time, but largely the report that has been prepared has been mostly thanks to, in good part, to Prashant, who worked a lot with our team, and I'll thank the rest of them later. But the work that we were engaged with the WGIC, which we're looking at trying to see exactly how PPP or P3 falls within the geospatial sector and how it can serve the members of the WGIC. And we went through about 8 different elements around it. Very strict time frame. We were driven by Sanjay as the General Secretary. And I think from that perspective, we produced a report in about 8 months with some sort of engagement through COVID or on a virtual platform, through dealing with some roundtables. We engaged with the UN and the World Bank, who are doing some, especially the World Bank study that came out on the land administration and PPP, and also the work done by Mark in terms of NGGIC and Sanjay involved in that as well around it. I think with PPP or P3, I'm not sure because everyone refers it differently, but you know, the collaboration largely deals with public and private. Often the public lacks the capacity to deal with the demand that's being presented, and the private sector really deals with innovation, technology, people, process, but largely are the ones needing to be invested. And around this comes the ability of having trust and security of investment around it. It was very interesting in today's discussion because I hadn't engaged with the academic network prior, but I think the role of the academic network, yeah, in playing a role to encourage policy and research in that through the academia could enhance some of the work that we're doing as the WGIC. Next slide, please, Asha. This is just a key, the key findings from the document. Just a summary. I'm not going to go through in much detail because Prashant's covered a lot of that around it. I think the key thing around this is mostly dealing with the elements around no private-public partnership or public-private partnership, for that matter, is, let's say, there's no commonality. Everyone we find is slightly different and unique in some way. And the key for us is to try and determine a framework for the geospatial industry and how the private sector and public sector can engage with each other. And around that, we're focusing primarily around the geospatial service, e-services, land information systems, surveys, earth observation. I'll come to a bit more on some of the other areas, and especially around the investments in climate resilience, infrastructure, health and humanities. I think COVID has presented some really good opportunities for us to look at it, mostly because of the capacity, especially I live in Africa, in South Africa, but from my experience in the African continent, the human capacity, let alone the ability for the public sector to engage and deal with developing infrastructure for geospatial purposes is almost zero from that. There's lots of efforts being put in, mostly through the development agencies, trying to get countries ready and available, but it's going to require a lot of work from the private sector to get involved, make sure that we can try and achieve the SDGs by 2030. So the last slide is given the work that we're doing in the next few months. We're largely targeting a few things. There were 4 recommendations that came out of the report from the committee. The 2 that are really key is the review of the legislative frameworks and how we can assist our members to leverage PPP and focusing on best practices and aligned to the geospatial sector. And the second one is around what Prashant covered in essence. So you got a peek into some of that work that's being done, is around the business models and which models are best suited for the geospatial sector, and largely focusing around infrastructure, AI, BIM, and land administration around that. I think that's the work. And in terms of the socialization of PPPs, which is part of some of the work we're doing today, and forming the linkages with the different agencies, that will try and do more from the WGIC itself within the committees and the executive. But those 2 pieces of work we'll be coming up with a new document early next year on dealing with these 2 that will assist not only the members, but also try and evangelize the use of PPPs in the geospatial sector. With that, I would like to firstly, thank our fellow members. We were a global committee. We had representation from all around the world, which is a good representation even from a diversity perspective and from a gender perspective. So I think that was a really good, diverse committee that we sat with, and we had excellent support from the WGIC Secretariat. So I encourage you to get the document if you've not. And I think in the next few months we'll try more engagements with the community to try and to get ideas around where we're going on business models and frameworks. With that, thank you very much, and I wish you all well.
Thank you, Willie. That was excellent. I think Maria's ears would be picking up on that opportunity for the academic network to do some policy and research, deep thinking that can enhance the work of WGIC in that translation role for government. Certainly the socialising the opportunities around PPPs in the academic sector. We're looking across, engineering infrastructure or other PPPs have been very successful. How do we translate those successful models across to the geospatial industry? Those kinds of questions would be really interesting to think about. But I digress. I'm supposed to be managing the panel, not being panel. So I will move to our final panelist now, Talia Baldwin. Now, Talia, I understand you've just come back from some holidays. Thank you for returning for this session. As the Director of the Geospatial Commission in the UK, which is an independent expert committee within the UK Government's Cabinet Office, you and your team are tasked with advising the government on priorities for improving the UK's location data. Small items like running the public sector's key geospatial data contracts and developing and overseeing the National Geospatial Strategy. Please, looking forward to hearing your comments on the topics canvassed today. Thanks, Talia.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, for the introduction. I am not going to be presenting any slides. I'm just going to take you through in a few minutes the topic of PPPs from a UK perspective and touch on some of the really fascinating insights about the kind of complexity in defining the geospatial sector and how you put a value against that, and then how you raise the value and importance of geospatial data as a kind of key underpinning capability to deliver wider policy priorities. And so just look at that through a UK perspective to try and make it a little bit more tangible around how we're working with industry through both collaboration and PPPs. So just a bit of background then on the UK. In the UK, the geospatial ecosystem is really mature. It is supported by a range of different public and private sector activities, public sector agencies that are set up with the intention of managing geospatial data and making that available. That ecosystem is evolving all the time. It doesn't just contain the National Mapping Agency and the relevant other agencies that look after subsurface marine data, for example. It also includes a bunch of other organizations that are tasked with delivering things, operationalizing bits of government policy using geospatial data. And so I'm director of the Geospatial Commission, which is a very small unit in the middle of the UK government that has been established to try and understand what's going on in the UK in the geospatial ecosystem, and then to make some targeted data improvements where organizations can best be working together, or we can put things in place that aren't there at the moment, or we can provide a more coherent approach to standardizing access to data. So for us, it's all about partnership, collaboration, working with industry, and really trying to think through how you sell the case for use of geospatial data to the political decision makers, as well as the people who decide what money is allocated to these kinds of bodies. So what we've done so far in terms of trying to get a sense of where best to target these collaborations is we've tried to understand what is actually going on in the UK geospatial market. So there's been some chat, and others have touched upon just the complexities here. I put in the chat earlier on a link to a report that the UK has published, and this is to a document that some economists put together to identify some of the headlines around how you even start to think about the UK market. So some of those headlines are that we don't really see it as one market or a sector. We see it as an ecosystem of overlapping capabilities. It's really hard to value that because you can identify which particular companies might be providing geospatial services or collecting geospatial data, but if that capability is embedded within a larger organization, then you just can't do that very well. It's really hard to identify both those organizations, but also then segment the value. So Sanjay referred to the revenue of Google's mapping bit, but we haven't been able to get hold of data like that or anything in relation to even kind of utilities companies with regards to their kind of geospatial capabilities in a very coherent way. So we're kind of taking a guess at what the real value is to make the case for further investment. The other issue is that making the economic case, it's really hard to have a credible narrative around spillover benefits, because once you start to identify what geospatial is used for in particular sectors, so whether you're building train lines or supporting emergency response or tackling environmental incidents in the short term or even over a longer term, then trying to model the value of those things in a credible way is incredibly difficult. And so we in the Geospatial Commission in the UK try and make that case a little bit more credible. And what that's resulted in is a range of different things that we are doing with industry to improve geospatial data. So I'm just going to touch on four of those very quickly, and would welcome any questions in the panel discussion. We can and can't map them onto the very interesting and useful PPP report that's been published, the business models there. So one of the things that we're doing is improving the public and the private sector access to our core geospatial data, the data that Ordnance Survey provide for us as our national mapping agency. So the way that we approach the partnership with Ordnance Survey as the supplier maps quite neatly onto the operation and upkeep contract in the list of business models, because we specify what that bit of the public sector is supplying the broader economy and how that will improve and be upgraded over the next 10 years, for example. So we have a very tight set of contractual terms that allow us to work with Ordnance Survey to do that in the UK, and then the whole of the public and the private sector in the UK benefits from access to that. It's very transparent and clear. One of the other things that we're doing is we are seeking to improve access to data that doesn't really exist in digital format. So we're focusing on underground utilities data first. And in the build phase, this maps very neatly onto the design and build business model in the PPP report, where we are procuring from industry a set of services that suppliers with the technical capability needed to set up something like what we need, but lots of the work will be done in-house around the legal data sharing agreements. And so we're really working both through the procurement route, but hand in hand with the supplier and with the rest of industry, with the utilities companies that will support provision of that data, to try and make sure that we can collaborate over the next few years to build this platform together, and work through that, because, you know, the government can give itself levers. We can mandate that we get hold of particular bits of data, but really without full buy-in from industry and from other government partners, this won't be successful. Those two things map quite neatly onto, as I said, something in the existing model. What we're finding, though, in tackling other specific data improvement objectives is that some things don't neatly map on. So, for example, we've identified that geospatial data is really relevant in the transport sector. Whether you're having a look at maps for the future of drones and how we regulate to make sure the industry can fly those in the way that it needs to, or whether we're looking at electric vehicle charging infrastructure, for example, how do we integrate that kind of capability with how other bits of the public sector are delivering those policy priorities? So one of the things that we've started to do is just work a little bit with companies to try and bring forward some innovations. So we're investing in a grant-funded way to support those innovators, but we're requiring that in order to get the money, those innovators partner with different local authorities, different regional parts of the public sector, to address specific challenges they might have that are transport themed. And so aspects of that are very close to what we would think of as more straightforward public-private partnerships, and other aspects really aren't, where we're trying to bring forward innovation. And then one of the other things that we're doing finally is to try and figure out how we think about geospatial data in the context of land use. And so again, trying to extend the capability and the strategic perspective around how we use mapping data, try to link this and persuade other people in the public sector, decision makers and ministers, from a political perspective, that geospatial data isn't separate from delivering affordable housing, efficient infrastructure, meeting our net zero targets. Is absolutely integral to those kinds of goals. So how do you best do that? And how can you have fairly novel collaborations and partnerships with industry to bring that about? So that's a very rough canter through where the UK is headed in terms of the expanding definition of geospatial data and how we want to integrate its capability alongside lots of other really important policy priorities where you wouldn't think about geospatial data traditionally as a means of delivering those. And hopefully that's useful. And look forward to touching more upon those things when we get to the panel discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Talia. I think if you look through the chat that's just been running along beside, I think there might be a couple of other questions for you. I am mindful of time, so I'm going to seek Derek's perspectives on closing now. I think the panel have done an exceptional job in answering and corresponding with the questions from the participants during this session. So thank you very much for doing that, in allowing us to expand the time that we had for our presenters to present fully. Perhaps we could, we're at 1:30 now, so perhaps if the panelists would like to provide a closing sentence each on your perspectives from what you have heard from the other panelists in answering the questions. Zafar, what would be your key take home from this session? Oh, you're on mute, Zafar. Thank you.
I think the key takeaway, I think, here is, I think the messages are very clear around the PPP models that has emerged through the report, but I think the community need to action around the gaps in policy literacy in the geospatial sector, and obviously the academia can help fill those gaps. Another point I'd like to make is the space and spatial initiatives are taking place very rapidly, and governments are looking at more private sector leadership where government is more taking a back step. So this is an opportunity, as Prashant alluded. So I think I agree with Prashant. This is very opportunistic moment for geospatial sector, government, academia, industry, to work across and take this advantage moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zafar. So moving through to the second speaker was Prashant. Zafar's just alluded to a few of your comments there. Do you have a closing statement that you would like to contribute?
I think the time is now, and I think action in coming together is absolutely essential for a number of the existential threats facing the globe. 1, climate change. 2, a post-COVID economy, and 3, the whole essence of closing the divides between nation states. And the reality is that no nation can go on its own anymore, and no national agency can go on its own. And so institutions like the UN, the private sector network, are going to be absolutely critical in changing dialogue, because we can have all the great strategies, but at the end of the day, if we don't change culture, culture eats strategy for lunch.
And breakfast and dinner. Thank you, Prashant. Okay, so moving through, we have our next was Willie. So Willie, closing. Zafar, feel free to remain on camera as well as we close off. Willie, yes, over to you.
I heard 2 key words in this presentation made by various speakers, and I think the one was trust and the other was uncertainty. And judging what's happening in the chat room as well, whether the public or private sectors can both be trusted in these times and dealing with public-private partnerships. But our work has proved that there are models that work if it's absolutely necessary, and it deals with both of those elements. And both parties have to be trusted. And normally, if someone's investing and putting money into something, they want to know that their return will be obligated in some way. So I think that is it. And most times PPPs are uncertain. The outcomes are really known, but the only reason they become PPPs is because in most cases the public sector does not know how to deal with these. Okay, so that's mine. Let's deal with those. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you. And Tyler, you have the honor of the last feedback. How would you provide a take-home message from this evening's conversations or this morning?
Thanks very much. I mean, I think that's incredibly insightful comments around the necessary trust between all partners when they're working together, especially on objectives that you could take in a different direction. So from a kind of government perspective, I suppose we often think about how the different opportunities exist around data sharing and data capture. And I think we're on kind of a precipice of realization, really, that there can be some great value realized if we trust each other to be able to work together to access the data that might be required to do a whole host of different things. And so I'm not sure I can add that much more to what others have said, but I know that there's a great deal of opportunity right now. And so looking forward to working together with everyone to make sure that we are headed in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Talia. So what a great way to finish our panel session before I pass back to Derek to close today's session, to say thank you very much to the panelists for your contributions. And I've learned a lot, and I hope that we can take on some of the challenges set from our industry colleagues within the academic network to help provide some bridges to the policy opportunities that await if we can get the awareness raising and the conversations moving with our government colleagues. Thank you, Derek.
Well, thank you so much for that, Cheryl. That was really a very powerful panel that you had there. And I think the contributions were really fantastic. I see the comments coming through as well. The questions, and thank you to the panelists for answering those on the sideline, because we have run out of time. But thank you very much for that. I would just like to ask Jim if you would like to make some closing remarks. Jim, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think all of us participating today instinctively understands the urgency for us to get our arms around the salient issues that were discussed today. I really believe that Dr. Bravelli must lead the way. It's fundamental for us to get our policy and our people in order to be able to do this. And of course, the panelists identified so many key strategic aspects that we need to address moving forward. I want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. Yes, I'd like to just echo your comments. I would also like to thank Stefan and Greg and their colleagues from the GGIM Secretariat for affording us this opportunity of hosting this side event. I think hopefully they'll agree with me when I say that I believe we did make a contribution to the efforts of GGIM. And so thank you to everyone. And to the participants, I hope that you achieved what you expected from the session. Thank you to all. Goodbye. Keep well, keep safe.